How's it going, guys? Top Tier Gaming here, and today do I have a fun discussion video for you. It's not so much a discussion as it is really just going through sort of terminology in Weiss Schwarz, because as Weiss players we tend to use a lot of really intricate terminology and we don't even realize we're doing it sometimes, and it can actually be super alienating for new players to come in, see a deck profile maybe, and not really understand what's going on because there's so many terms they don't understand. And I feel like this sort of alienation is actually really bad for a game that really wants to see new players coming in. So I feel like having a video where I sort of go through some terminology that might be really hard to understand and sort of make it easy in layman's terms would be really helpful for the Weiss community. So this isn't really a video that's going to be going over the very basic intro level terms such as like trigger, clock, stock. These are terms I expect one trying to get into the game sort of already knows. This is more for terms like runner, Riki, apples, things of this nature where there's usually like a source card that has replicated effects in Weiss Schwarz that are very similar to the base original card, and we sort of tend to call all cards of this certain effect that name. And when it's not the name of the card people are looking for in a deck profile, it sort of stirs up confusion. So there's no way I can go through every sort of Weiss terminology in the game, and not every Weiss terminology is the same for your area. In some areas people use different terms to describe certain things, so your mileage may sort of vary with this, but I'm going to go over the biggest sort of words people use to describe certain card effects that may help the newer player, and this may just be a fun video for more experienced players. Alright, so getting into it, I want to start with the term runner. So this is a card in Weiss Schwarz that sort of describes a usually level 0 that can move places on the board. It can actually go from one slot to another slot at the beginning of an attack phase. These are very powerful cards in Weiss Schwarz, and almost every single deck wants to have a runner. So it's a term we sort of throw out there a lot, and you're going to hear it so many times because every deck attempts to run a runner of their set because they are such powerful cards. But it's very simple. Pretty much it is just a character that moves across the board. Pretty easy to understand. Runner moving across the board. Pretty simple. However, instantly going into one that is a lot harder to understand is the Riki effect. So all the time in deck profiles nowadays you'll hear the term, this card is a Riki, and there's no way to understand what that card means just from hearing the name, obviously. So I'm actually not too sure on the source card for this effect, but a Riki effect is very easy to understand and explain. It's pretty much you do an effect, usually paying a stock and clocking yourself as the cost of the effect to essentially gain a card for free or +1. There's all sorts of different types of Rikis. There's all sorts of different ways. There's stuff that sort of places cost 0 characters based on your level onto the field. There's Riki effects that add a card from your waiting room to your hand. There's Riki effects that add a card from your deck to your hand. But they're all essentially just +1 effects, and these are the cards that we've sort of dictated are called Rikis. I'm sure there is a base card in a set for which the Riki effect sort of originated. I'm just not quite sure which one it is. Yeah, but there are a lot of cards on this list that have an original card base, and most of them I actually do know the original card, so that will be helpful going forward. So the next type of card I want to talk about is actually one that we have sort of dictated to be called the Akatsuki. We say Akatsuki clone a lot, and this actually originates from a card in the second set of Kantai collection. It's a green Akatsuki, and pretty much all of these effects pretty much mean a card that on play you discard a card from your hand and you reveal up to the top 4 cards of your deck, and you can select an X type of character amongst them based on what your deck is and based on the Akatsuki clone. You tend to hear these a lot too. These are cards that a lot of sets, we sort of hope they have because Akatsuki effects are just very powerful at thinning your deck and getting certain resources. So every deck wants an Akatsuki, not every deck gets one, but they are very powerful effects, and you will hear them a lot, especially for certain decks, because if a set has an Akatsuki, 9 times out of 10 it's running it. So the next term I want to talk about isn't actually a type of card that has an effect that we sort of name other cards off of. It's actually the term sandbagging. So this is a term that I sort of stumbled onto recently because we didn't really use this term back in like 2014-ish when I was playing before. It feels like a newer thing that's come up. Maybe people did say it and I just wasn't aware of it. But sandbagging is actually when you're just sort of ramming your characters when they're smaller into bigger characters. But it's more used in a term that's not like, you know, you did it once this one turn. It's more like when you're sandbagging characters constantly, like maybe you're behind in the level game and you just have to swing smaller characters into larger characters, you're sort of sandbagging your characters. Now, this is one where your mileage may vary. Some places might actually just not use this term, but I've heard it on quite a few videos on YouTube to sort of mean this general statement of ramming smaller characters into larger characters, and sort of like almost in a derogatory sense where you're throwing characters away, but because you have to. So that one's sort of hard to understand, but I hope I've explained it the best way I can. That is a new one to me, but it is a term newer players might not understand, but may hear a lot, so I think it's really worth explaining. So the next one is actually one that is very near and dear to my heart, because my first Weiss deck ever ran the base card for this sort of effect that other cards have gotten their name off of. And this is the card called Apples. So when people say an Apples effect, they usually mean a card that has a bond, which means it's grabbing a specific card from Waiting Room, the card effect that is being called in Apples. And it originates from Madoka Magica, which had this set called, or had this card called Kyoko Shares an Apple. And it pretty much bonded for this vanilla Sayaka. And these effects are very powerful, but I feel like they've sort of left Weiss almost. Not entirely, but they're much less seen, especially one that was actually as good as Apples. Apples was a +1 and gave 1,000 power to this vanilla, which you don't want to run vanillas, but Apples was actually super powerful for being an advantage engine in Madoka Magica, especially in the early days of Weiss Schwarz. And I really like effects like these because they're just really close to me in the sense that I spent so much time playing with this card. It was my favorite card in the deck. And I'm really glad that there are other cards like this, and I'm glad people call them Apples just because I really enjoy this card. So yeah, in layman's terms, an Apple card is one that bonds for another, most of the time at a +1, hopefully, because otherwise I feel like calling it Apples is actually just not giving Apples justice. But yeah, it's bonding for another card in sort of an advantage engine type way. So the next one I want to describe is actually more of a new effect in Weiss Schwarz. This is a type of card that I think has come up in maybe like the last couple years while I was away from the game. But it's really easy to understand. They're called clean cuts. So these are effects, usually level 0s, that sort of send one of your cards to the back row. Like the best example I can give is as a clean cut or clear cut. Is it a clean cut or a clear cut? I've already lost my train of thought. It's one of those. Clean cut. We're going with that one. So there's a rem that is in the Re-0 set, and when it's on play, or when it comes into play, it gets big. And then when it reverses an opponent's character by battle, you can send, or you select one of your front row characters, rest it, and move it to the back row. So that's what if you hear clean cut, that's what it means. It's pretty much a card that sort of saves another card by putting it in the waiting room, or putting it in your back row, excuse me, not the waiting room. And this is essentially you get a free attack, and then you don't lose that character. So they're very powerful for tri-laning at level 0. You can use it with your Suiciders, which is really good, and that's actually the next type of card we're going to get into, which is the Suicider/Bomb. So yeah, as far as these effects goes of Suicider/Bombs, I feel like more like in 2013, 2014, Suicider was the predominant term being used, just because the bigger channels were using that term. But now, honestly, I hear bomb a lot more, which I guess is more fair because the word Suicider is such a derogatory term. I think it's actually worse than saying bomb. So maybe that's the reason why it sort of shifted to this, I don't really know. But it pretty much describes an effect that it is a level of a certain card that reverses levels of the same type of card. So a level 0 bomb is one that when it's reversed by a level 0 or lower character, that level 0 lower character is also reversed. Same thing at level 1 and at level 2. There are also anti-change bombs, which I'll explain anti-change in a second, but it's pretty much a bomb that kills things that are higher level than the current level of the opponent. So bombs are pretty much things that reverse whatever they say they reverse when they're reversed. That was a lot of the use of that one word, but hopefully in layman's terms it was very easy to understand, because I know hearing bomb or Suicider when you're new to the game and you're watching a deck profile, you may be sort of confused at what people are talking about, so glad to get that one sort of out there. Now to quickly discuss anti-change, because it is sort of an effect that you might not understand if you're newer to the game. Anti-change is pretty much, there used to be a very predominant sort of card effect which was change, which was other cards could go into other cards that were usually a higher level than your current level. Now that effect is actually kind of outdated. You don't see that as often. Now we have more of what's called the early play, which are level 3s usually in your hand that get -1 level in your hand for fulfilling a certain condition, and they can come out on the field early. However, we still call these effects anti-change, which pretty much describes cards that get rid of cards that were changed into, or cards that are early plays. So that one's pretty easy to understand, but I felt like since I said it in the last explanation, I should get this one out there as well. The next one's a pretty fun one. It's the term free fresh. This is actually just kind of a silly term, but a lot of people say it. It describes an effect that does your refresh for free. So if you're new into the game, you know that, and you're learning the game, not just off the start, but once you get into the game a little bit, you'll know that when you run out of cards in your deck, you actually refresh your waiting room or graveyard, whatever you want to call it, and it becomes your new deck. The term free fresh describes cards that sort of come in and do it for you, and you don't take the refresh point damage. These are also really popular types of card effects. You can hear it all the time. Free fresh itself, even though these cards are very popular, I don't think a lot of people say free fresh. It's not a very oftenly used term. Oftenly, I'm not even sure oftenly is an oftenly said word. So, yeah, I don't even think it's a word, but that's free fresh. Next card type. So the last card type I kind of want to go over today is the one called the Shema Cause type card. So this also sort of originates from Kantai Collection, the first set of Kantai Collection, and it was a level 1 that Climax comboed with a 2K1, I believe, and on reverse, when it reverses its opponent's characters, you could search a ship girl. So there were actually effects very similar to this before, like Invites to Party used to be a very common card, people said, because Invites to Party was very powerful for its time. But it sort of became the more Shema Cause style where you level 1 Climax combos tend to need to reverse their opponent's characters. I'm not even sure Shema Cause was the first one of its kind, but I feel like more often than not, people say Shema Cause to describe this type of effect, maybe because she was the most prevalent, because Kantai Collection was a very powerful set in its day, before the release of Nisekoi, which sort of changed the level 3 games for a lot of power creep. It released a very strong card, but before that, Kantai was super, super powerful. Still is really good, I think. And Shema Cause sort of stole the limelight in this type of effect. It's a very popular effect nowadays, although most of the time people just say what the card does, but if you do hear Shema Cause effect, it does tend to mean that it's a Climax combo that on reverse, it searches something, or salvages something. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. There was no way I would be able to sort of think of all the terminology in this game, or explain all of it in one video. But I hope I've explained enough of effects, because I know new players come into this game, they hear some of these terms, and they have no idea what's happening, and they're kind of put off by the fact that they're watching something they don't understand. It makes it harder to get into the game. So a video like this is actually pretty good for a new player base that might want to come in. They can sort of understand the effects and help them get into the game, which I really like the idea of, because this game really wants new players. So, yep, I hope you enjoyed the video. This was Top Tier Gaming by YouTube.